It's going to come back.
Everyone, please take their seats.
Yep.
It looks like it's still cooking.
Is it still, Jennifer, could you please check on?
It's changing.
It's doing
I
something.
imagine it is.
It's
Comes up in a
on.
couple more times, it'll change some more.
Mr. Haberman, that was an abuse of the public process.
Permission to respond?
No.
No.
Go,
No, it's good.
Go, Mr. Haberman. Thank you. Okay, so I'll call this meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. We'll start with a roll call. Mr. Constant.
Christopher Constant.
Forrest Dunbar.
Pete Peterson.
Felix Rivera.
Thanks, Alex.
John Weathers.
Crystal Kennedy.
Could we, just the people who are going to present, please?
Oh, sure. I'm Lindsay Hyduk.
Okay.
Zach Fields.
Justin Dahl with APD.
Thank you. All right, so we've got a shorter agenda than is usual with this committee. We started the longer one, and then some of the things we actually resolved, like for example the AFD pay issues. We've been working in other venues on that. So we're going to start today with Representative Fields speaking about autonomous vehicles, and perhaps we will get out of here early. We'll see. But yeah, please, Representative Fields, if you would.
Thanks. So I used to be on the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Lindsay is on there now, and I think many people are not aware that the rate of pedestrian and cyclist collisions with vehicles has been rising sharply as we've seen greater integration of digital technology in vehicles. And I was somewhat surprised. I requested a ledge legal opinion, and right now a company could deploy fully autonomous vehicles in Alaska with a special license plate, and nothing would prevent them from operating those vehicles in snowy conditions at night, and the technology is not there for that to be safe in a winter environment. So that was kind of the background. And Lindsay, do you want to add some of your background with
Sure.
Safety advocacy?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So again, I'm Lindsay Hyduk. Hello. I know most of you. And I currently serve on the Anchorage Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. I have volunteered in the past as a board member for Bike Anchorage and have been a strong advocate for safer, connected streets in our community. And I'm no longer serving on the board for Bike Anchorage. And I'm really just here as a volunteer as part of this committee. In talking with other pedestrian advocates and bicycle advocates, this issue has come up, and I'm by no means an expert at all in this, but we wanted to bring this issue forward as part of just a bigger scope and look of the Vision Zero initiative that the municipality has adopted and is moving forward on to make our roadways more safe for pedestrians and bicyclists and people in cars. And pedestrians are disproportionately impacted and most vulnerable when they're in collisions to have major injuries and also to die, and that's what we're seeing in our community. So we wanted to bring this issue forward. Yeah, I'll scroll. So just
Lindsay, if I could interrupt you for just
Sure.
a second. Suzanne, Ms. LaFrance, are you online?
Yes, Mr. Dunbar, I'm here. Thanks.
Is there anyone else online for the record? Okay, thank you. I apologize. Please continue.
Yeah, no worries. So we wanted to bring this topic forward because in other communities where autonomous vehicles are being introduced, and sometimes they're like Zach had said, they can happen without a lot of fanfare. That there are autonomous vehicles on the roadways. So in looking at other communities across the U.S. and seeing some of the challenges that happen, it's often with the vehicles not being able to identify when there are pedestrians in crosswalks, or to identify roadway markers when there's snow or other environmental factors that obscure, like paint on the roadways and different ways to keep those vehicles moving forward. So we wanted to just share that overall there is a trend that pedestrian fatalities across the U.S. are increasing since 2008, and we want to make sure that we are taking some actions forward preventatively if autonomous vehicles do appear in Anchorage at some point.
Can I ask a question about that before you go on?
Mhm.
So, obviously, autonomous vehicles, that 48% since 2008 obviously cannot be ascribed entirely to autonomous vehicles because they're just not that common.
Correct, not at all.
So when you say, so two questions. One is, what do you mean by digitization, if not autonomy? And second, could a confounding factor be here, and I'm just speculating, but could a confounding factor be here a rise in the number of cyclists on the road? I mean, we have been promoting that, and more Americans are starting to cycle. So could that explain that rise as opposed to digitization?
I think the short answer is no, and the reason I say that is you can break down bike ridership in different communities, and in communities where you have sharply rising bike ridership, you actually tend to have lower rates of collisions, and that's largely because you tend to have a culture shift where people get more, car drivers get more used to cyclists being on the road, and they actually have fewer collisions.
Yeah.
And you can see that in a wide range of cities across the country. I think we're kind of in a middle ground with respect to integration of digital technology with vehicles. So, when it says digitization here, it's integration of your phone with your car. So we're kind of in the middle ground where vehicles aren't fully autonomous, they're partially autonomous. I have a 2019 car, it has some automatic stopping ability, it's highly unreliable. And so we're kind of in this weird middle ground that unfortunately is very dangerous for people on the street.
Yeah, it's funny, just before you continue, I saw an article, I think it was last night or this morning, talking about, it was a federal agency or someone talking about mandating helmet laws because of this exact rise. And I thought it was funny because on the one hand, yeah, getting people to wear a helmet is really important. On the other hand, we just had a cyclist killed in my district where he was hit so hard it would have made zero difference at all had he been wearing a helmet. To me, it seems a little bit like victim blaming to that to be the policy response. So we need to, yeah.
It's totally blaming the victim, and the data on this is really clear. If a car is traveling more than 35 miles per hour when it hits a pedestrian or a bicyclist, they're probably going to die. And if the car is going less than 25, they're probably going to live. And when you look at pedestrian and cyclist death rates across countries, there's actually an inverse correlation with wearing helmets. So countries where people don't wear helmets are actually safer. And it's not because they aren't wearing helmets, it's because riding a bike or being a pedestrian is more common, therefore it's safer because it's built into the transportation network. So you're right, wearing helmets is not going to solve the problem when you have really high-speed vehicle collisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Please continue.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that maybe on the next slide, but this is just a recognition that a lot of the testing for autonomous vehicles is happening in mostly dry and sunny climates. I mean, you'll think of kind of the Silicon Valley as being one of those testing grounds. Arizona and Florida are some other places for that, where there is a driving culture, but the weather is really not as variable as we have here and with our winter. So we could foresee companies wanting to test their autonomous vehicles in winter climates and conditions, and we just want to make sure that we're not the guinea pig here in Anchorage for that type of a shift for winter testing. And this is where we talk about there is a lot of blame on pedestrians or even bicyclists if they are in any collisions in some of these places where they are testing this technology. And they're even encouraging things not like helmets, but like having little tags that emit messages to the car to let you know that you're there, so the cars can detect you. So it really puts the onus on a pedestrian to be safe rather than the actual vehicle or technology to be safe for our roadways.
I got to comment on this. I mean,
Yeah.
This is so outrageous. I've got a toddler. The notion that, my toddler would have to have an RFID tag on her when I have problems convincing her just to put pants on in the morning is just totally ridiculous.
Mhm.
So I think it's really important to know this is why we're coming to y'all. Our democratic systems of government have to respond because industry is not kind of centering this based on people's safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for kids, I mean, we always try to get reflective tags and bright colors to get an ID tag on them. It's a whole nother challenge. So what we're hoping to do to promote proactive actions on this is to prohibit autonomous vehicles for the municipality, and then also making sure that we're not being that test case for those changes.
Yeah, and to be really clear, we're not saying that autonomous vehicles per se should be prohibited from operating in the city. We're saying they should not be operated here without a human driver until and unless they've proven to be safe in similar environmental conditions. Because you can have an autonomous vehicle that operates with a human driver with override capacity. And in my view, that's okay, because you still have that human recognition of a lot of complex environmental conditions. What's not okay is for a company to test a vehicle in Arizona and then deploy it in Alaska when that vehicle hasn't gone through the iterative learning process of operating in a winter environment. And I think it's important to recognize the way that these companies are testing their vehicles. It's a trial and error process. So these companies right now are trying to figure out with their camera technology, how does a vehicle differentiate a plastic bag drifting across the road from a kid? Well, that takes literally millions of trial and error scenarios because there's so many different variations. And what they haven't done is gone through that process in a winter environment. And it's way more complex. And because of camera technology, whiteness is actually a challenge for a lot of these cameras. There was a death in Florida because an autonomously operated vehicle ran into a tractor trailer, and it was a white tractor trailer. And the company said, well, the technology didn't recognize white very well. So I would say, if you can't operate safely with a white tractor trailer, you definitely can't operate safely in a winter environment, much less one where, because of studded tires, the lanes often get worn down much more quickly. So I'm in the legislature. I would love to tell you that the Alaska State Legislature is going to respond to changing technology tomorrow and pass a statewide law. In the situation we're in with a part-time session and a budget crisis, that's not realistic. And that's why I'm here with Lindsay, because the Anchorage Assembly is very nimble and I think very responsive to public safety issues. And you have the ability to protect public safety here in our community. And look, autonomous vehicles are going to operate in Alaska, I think at some point, probably in my lifetime. I just want to make sure that they're not testing it on, my daughter.
Okay, so I have a few questions. We'll start with Ms. Solotel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to dive in here, what you're asking for specifically, prohibit the use of autonomous vehicles operating without a human driver. So if I understand correctly, you're saying that it could be an autonomous vehicle, I'm assuming properly registered with the state for experimental plates, but has, and could be driving autonomously as long as there's a human in it and they can override the controls.
Correct.
Okay.
And companies do that. That's a normal way they test vehicles. They also test vehicles that are operating fully autonomously without a human driver, and that is what should be prohibited in the municipality.
And there's, in terms of state law, you could right now go ahead and operate a car with no human in it.
Mm-hmm. It would potentially have special license plates, but that Ledge Legal informed me that that's all they would need is a special license plate.
And would a special license plate be needed for ones with humans in them?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But that's kind of my understanding is that that's kind of an automatic thing through the DMV. That's not like they would have to go get regulatory approval.
And do we have a definition somewhere of autonomous vehicles? Because I think that's going to be...
I don't believe they're defined in state law.
That's going to really be, I think, the juggernaut of this, because we have digitalization of a lot of vehicles. I mean, I don't drive anything made since the mid-90s, quite honestly, and they keep getting older. But I understand these newer cars have computers in them.
These newfangled cars.
So I think there's some issues with that, because you said your car could break or do some things on its own. So that's really, I guess, where I would need more information is how do we define autonomous vehicles The operating without a human driver, I'm clear on, but that piece right there, I think, is really the crux of the issue.
I think one way you could deal with that now is just prohibit operation of vehicles without a human driver. And not deal with kind of the assembly defining what an autonomous vehicle is, because that would cover it. And then at a later date, when the assembly feels comfortable, these things have been tested in a similar environment and are safe, you could go back and change that.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm actually, I'm nervous about not defining an autonomous vehicle because technology is going to shift on us quickly, and we need to make sure that we're really clear about what we're talking about. And that raises a little bit of a red flag for me, especially if there's no way to otherwise identify autonomous vehicles because they wouldn't necessarily require an experimental plate. So I'm just trying to balance that we could have knowledge when they're on the road and know exactly what we're talking about when we say this, because if we're saying until they've shown to operate safely in similar conditions in winter cities, we need to know that we're comparing apples to apples type thing. So, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Singleton. Mr. Weldon?
Thanks. So I don't think I argue much with your end result here, but I would say in regard to some things Meg brought up, there's a group here, Society of Transportation Engineers or something, that's totally involved with this, and I've gone to a couple of their presentations, and maybe you have that. These things are crisply defined by people, so it's not hard to find the definitions. But they did show, I saw a long video of one of their things with testing in Michigan, specifically for snow, and they had snowmakers testing blizzard conditions and all the different variety of things. So it seemed to me there is very intense work being done in a variety of winter weather, rain, all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely it's a challenge, but they're absolutely not ignoring that. And some things, it's like, I think we're all kind of down on those ninja bikers who wear black and dark bikes and they don't ride right. So we wear colors and helmets and lights. Well, are now we owning it? And it's our fault if we get hit? Because we were not really. So an RFID chip, I'm totally on board with that. If that'll help me not get hit, put it in my little flashing light. It's not a difficult. So, what I saw there was encouraging people, encourage you to wear a helmet, encourage you to wear lights, and so on. So if that's another safety thing, I'm good with it. To be honest with you, I think the technology needs obviously more work, but I look forward to it as a bicyclist and motorcyclist because I don't trust this. And that's our problem right now is people reading their cell phones, and I think that's why you see that growth in pedestrian fatalities. People are multitasking, and we can't do that.
Thank you, Mr. Weldon. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. Simple definition, that's an interesting idea. I can see how that would work for a while, although I think it would also rub up against public will at some point, because I am hearing more and more conversation every day, almost every day. People want self-driving cars because they're tired of the bad drivers around them, because they're, want to spend that time doing something better than driving. And I wonder if we have the power to also require, if it's an experimental technology, some kind of a rule in the municipality for registration, et cetera. I know many of these motor vehicle rules are state-driven, which brings up a point you alluded to, the state's inability to legislate at this point because of exigent circumstances. But what comes to mind, and this is to me the biggest red flag, is just this is going to be argued it's a transportation network company deal, and we're going to be boxed out of regulating this at all. And so that's the threat that I see. We'll have some moves that we can do in the short term, but it won't be long before the multi-million-dollar lobbyists show up in Juneau and box Anchorage out of the conversation. So that's where probably we're going to need some help. And to the point of clothing, it's interesting, RFID or not, in ski world, Reco chips are a thing. And a Reco chip is a chip that when you have a signal sent out, it sends a signal back. And that's built into almost every bit of ski clothing you could buy, especially every piece of outerwear. And so I would guess as we go forward, this will just become part of the fabric of everything.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we might have to do some thinking outside the box on this because it's new technology. Anyway, I remember way back when I was getting a driver's license, I had to do a driver's test with it over the DMV. You actually sat in the car and the guy, you had to pass that. I think they still do that. How about if we created a requirement for a driver's test for autonomous vehicles? I think that would be a possible public safety enhancement idea. And also, things that we need to be aware of. There might be someone that owns a cab company out there that might think this might be a way to save, be a labor-saving device, and they might go to trying to save money and having an autonomous vehicle as a cab. And also, at our AMATS meeting last week, one of the guys from DOT was telling us that he had rented an autonomous vehicle when he was at a conference down in Phoenix. And they actually had a presentation on autonomous vehicles, and he said one of the applications that they think they might be most successful with is trucking, where they'll have one truck driver followed by 2 or 3 other trucks behind it that are autonomous, doing coast-to-coast or long-range, forwarding of items. And so it's just, it's a changing technology, so we're just going to have to keep abreast of it and try to figure out ways to make it safe.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Constance, Ms. Kennedy, and then I think we need to move on to the next topic.
Yeah, Pete, you just hit on it. I think trucking is actually where it's going to hit. The roads, that'll be boutique opportunities once a real market exists. We're still 20 years behind on the Tesla curve. And so, but the trucks, we're going to be seeing regular deliveries of goods as soon as this technology is on the ground.
Thank you, Mr. Constance. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm good with, if you just talk about the fact that you have a vehicle operating on the streets without a human driver. I'm kind of sold on protecting us from the potential dangers of that. But obviously the technology is going to improve, and we're going to see more of these. I think the trucking industry has already been looking at this for years already, but even the home delivery system, Walmart's going to want to do this, and so it's gonna get here eventually. But that would be my question: is at what point do you have enough information or data that says, okay, these are now operating safely?
Right.
I mean, how few accidents do we have to have? Is it 0 accidents? Is it, as a decrease to a number that we think is, which is a terrible thing to say, but an acceptable number of accidents? Anyway, so that, I think that would be kind of your challenge too, is to figure out exactly when we would know, okay, they're safe enough now that we can start to allow this.
I mean, my opinion would be the Assembly could make an informed decision about that based on looking at data from autonomous vehicles operating in winter environments. And one measure would be, are the accident rates lower than for non-autonomous vehicles? Are they a marginal improvement? Probably we never reach perfection with any mode of transportation, but is it better than what exists now? That would be one way of looking at it. And I think it's going to be easy to look at that data as they are deployed in other cities. And I agree with you that eventually it's going to be safer. It's just avoiding that rise in fatalities and collisions in the meantime. And we can't avoid that here because someone else can be the guinea pig, frankly. Or we can be a guinea pig if they have human drivers with the override capacity and do testing safely.
Thank you, Representative Fields. Lindsay, do you have any concluding remarks?
No, I appreciate you guys considering this. Like was said, this is a technology that will come to our community, and so if we can do it on our terms and make sure our roadways remain safely, that's in the best interest for everyone, businesses and individuals alike.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I think we're going to move on to the next topic. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
All right, next up we have Victims for Justice, and I believe, do you guys have a slideshow as well? Do we have some way for them to show you a slideshow?
Yeah, they're going to.
Okay, great. Please. Yeah, we'll take a couple minutes for you guys to set up. That'd be great. Thank you.
It's fascinating. So the event is really awesome.
Well, it's different actually. It's going to be
They're talking about
electric discussion.
Yeah, they will. There's so much there's so much cost there.
And I just want to move on a little early. please don't think anything when you get up and walk out.
I upset you, I'm so sorry.
No, that's not it.
You can trade with the car.
It just kind of popped up.
That's what I thought.
Project, I can talk about it.
I'm terrible at technologies.
Sometimes there's a function.
Do you want to do that for Amber? So with her?
Oh, there we go.
I think this is, I
Whatever
mean,
it was,
I think
it
this
was
is
magic.
for
I'll let you go
70.
back.
This is the last
Alright,
one that
great.
we've got. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the last one. Yeah, it'd be interesting for the state tax.
Okay.
So I think it is the state.
All right. Let's move on to our next topic. We're joined today by Victims for Justice, whom Mr. Weddleton and I met at an event a couple months ago, and they've agreed to come and introduce their organization and the kind of work that they are doing. So, if you could please identify yourself for the record.
I'm Victoria Shanklin, the Executive Director of Victims for Justice.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for having a presentation. Please take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you for the invite again. I'm with Victims for Justice. We're an organization that was started in 1985 following a brutal triple homicide and home invasion, at which point sisters Sharon Narhoni and Janice Lenhart started an organization to advocate for the rights of victims in the judicial system specifically. So years down the road, that's expanded to be more direct services. But as far as we are aware, today Victims for Justice is the only organization in the state that specializes in serving victims of other crime. And other is in quotations because it's really a catch-all. So a lot of our focus when we talk about violence, and for good reason in this state, is around sexual assault and domestic violence, but there's still assault, arson, robbery, homicide, and even when it is a domestic violence situation that escalates to the point of homicide, Victims for Justice tends to be the organization that then picks it up from there. So our services include everything from grief and emotional support to education about the criminal justice system, acting as a go-between between sometimes law enforcement or legal services, resource and referral, emergency financial support following an incident, assistance with victim impact statements. There's a pretty long list there. We do serve statewide, but for fairly obvious reasons. The majority of our families that we serve are in the Anchorage area, and that's by far. And for those that it does say there's a few in the lower 48, and that's the crime did occur in Alaska, which is why we may work with that family. So I don't know how many of you have been impacted by violent crime directly, and not just by your constituents, but have actually had something happen to you. But I can tell you that I was robbed at gunpoint in downtown Anchorage a few years ago, and nothing that I thought I would do did I do. You know, I thought I had a plan. I thought I knew what I would do. I thought look around me, maybe carry keys between your knuckles, do all the things that you think you're gonna do. And people say fight, people say flight, and then there's me, I'm a freezer. So I can tell you that a lot of the time, we aren't really prepared, even though we think we're prepared for something to happen. And sure, we maybe get a card from the police or something like that, and I can tell you I promptly lost that card. I have no idea what happened to it. And even in the moments following that. And so a lot of the time in these cases, what we're doing is we aren't really thinking from the lens of a victim, right? And we think about it, or we think about a particular moment in the victim experience. So we're thinking about the moment that the crime occurs. Okay, what happens then? Well, there's multiple instances when a traumatic event occurs that victims then experience re-traumatization or triggering, right? And that could happen on a law enforcement level when they're just trying to have to retell their story a lot of times. It can happen then on the legal level when they realize that there's 50 hearings, they don't understand what's happening, and that there isn't actually somebody in the courtroom that's representing the victim in most cases. They're representing the defendant, which can't always be something easy to understand or comprehend what's going on. And then throughout the trial, if there is a trial, and in cases of homicide, as we know in Anchorage, that can take up to 2 years to even occur. So meanwhile, the victims are kind of going through multiple events that are triggering them. And then even years down the road, if there is a parole hearing or something, and victim impact statements need to occur again. So Victims for Justice, when we talk about what work we do, we follow, from the point that we are invited into a situation, we can follow a case and work with a family at different points if there's a need for services, and it may just depend on where that is. One of the things we found was that, in looking at our services over the last 2 years, is that really clients weren't getting to us until about a year or 2 years down the road. So we were really missing a vital gap in which victims had an opportunity to spiral out, whether that was because they didn't have financial support. So, for instance, they couldn't go to work, they didn't, or they missed some work, right? They've got a family, and then there's this ripple effect, or not getting the emotional support that they needed early on, or just getting frustrated over and over and over again with the system. So then they shut down and aren't working with police, or they're not working with prosecution, right? So we really noticed that there was a need for earlier intervention, specifically in cases of other crime, but could even be used in terms of domestic violence, something where somebody could make contact and have comfortable somebody to talk to. So anyway, we offer support in all of those areas. It's also an overburdened system, as we know. So victims are, whether it's they're calling the victim witness coordinators or the detectives over and over again, that can be really difficult for everyone involved. And so our goal is just really to be here as a resource and to say, hey, we actually have the time and we also have this expertise that we're willing to offer if anyone would like to utilize it. Again, what we know is that professional victim advocacy is a much needed resource, and that it is different from a lot of the time what we think we're doing when we check a box and we say we've given this resource to a victim. Is it a professional victim advocate? Because that can look a lot different than, for instance, a victim witness paralegal, which also offers a valuable resource, but it's not the same thing as victim advocacy. It's knowing what resources are available in the community. It's being able to sit there and listen and guide and walk alongside the victim throughout the process. We are very interested in the multidisciplinary approach, once again, which is like allowing everyone to do what they are an expert at. And we also offer a certain amount of confidentiality that goes both ways. So for instance, we don't have access to all of the court documents that are going on, so we don't know everything that the lawyers know, right? So there isn't a risk of us accidentally or inadvertently sharing information that shouldn't be shared. Same with when we work with police, we don't know what's going on in the investigation. So there isn't that risk of potentially damaging a case or anything like that. And likewise, victims can feel more comfortable talking to us if they need to, so that they can say, oh, this is what was going on here, even if it wasn't related to the incident, and then they may feel more comfortable divulging things further down the road. So what do we know in Anchorage and in Alaska in general? So what we know is, as everybody else has heard, we are still exceeding national averages. Even though these ones are a little bit older, it's still 2018. But that's not just, again, in what we tend to talk about, which is DV and SA. It's in assaults, it's in homicides, it continues to be an issue. We also, again, continue to forget to mention the other crime that is occurring. When we talk about a lot of these things, I can tell you, actually, Alaska state statutes, when you say victim advocate, victim counseling center, it is defined as someone who has experienced DV and SA. Other crime is not actually in there. So it's interesting when we look at it that. And continuously, we tend to still forget to look through the lens of a victim when we develop policies and when we decide, oh, we're gonna fix. We catch attention to a particular issue, and then we say, well, we're gonna fix that. But a lot of the time, that's not done through the lens of the victim, so we're not actually increasing accessibility to services. I have an example of that, and what I mean is when I tell you when I was robbed, right, and I was given a card, or I was probably given this blue book, I can tell you I have absolutely no idea if I was given this blue book and what it was, but given this right here with all of this information is incredibly overwhelming for someone who's been through a traumatic event. And me being able to look through this at any point in time and go, oh, these are my rights, what does that mean? This isn't, even though it's checking the box and yes, we've given the victim information, it's not actually accessible to a victim. And what I mean by that is I can't process this information, not in that moment. And so I think just keeping in mind when we make changes, when we say we're going to inform victims of their rights or we're going to give them resources, what does that look like? Is it an advocate that sits down and explains what's going on with them, to them, and explains it probably multiple times, because I'm not going to get it the first time, probably not going to get it the second time. But it would be really helpful, and yes, is it awesome to have this to go back and look at? Yes, but I might need to hear the information in multiple ways. And in another sense, so for instance, this is really good because, right, police can fit it in their pocket, and that's really exciting.
It's always a good test as to whether or not it's going to get used.
So then we decide, oh, this is too hard to read, so then this gets remade. This doesn't fit in the pocket. This is not going to get used, right? And so then we tout, oh, look, we redid this. It's super easy and more accessible to victims, but it's not if the police can't give it out. And so I think, again, and just looking when we decide to revamp things, making sure we're talking to all of our partners and figuring out, well, what actually is going to get work for people on different levels. So yes, the lens of the victim, but also the police that have to hand it out.
Sorry, Ms. Shanklin? Is that
Yes.
how you pronounce it? We have a question from Mr. Peters.
Thank you. And I was just thinking with, the new technology, everything going to your cell phone, could they put that on audio? And then you could download it to your cell phone and then people could put their earbuds in and listen to it?
They are going to develop one for online, which is awesome. Yeah. I don't think it's there yet, but I did hear that it was going to.
All right. Thank you.
Ms. Solotel?
I actually have a lot of questions around actually what you're talking about, both as someone who has been an advocate for folks who been victims and actually a crime victim myself. So how do you, I have like 4 questions here. Who or how do you define what constitutes a victim?
I'm sorry, I was speaking over. Go ahead.
So Victims for Justice, again, we say victim of violent crime, right? And that's pretty broad. So about 20% of our caseload still is DV related, DV or SA, but we try to focus on the other crime. What we kind of stick to is as defined by Violent Crime Compensation Board is a good catch-all because what they have and what kind of crimes they include. Person on person is something that we use in terms of violence. So for instance, we don't do property harm. While it is absolutely violating when something like that occurs, that's not within the scope of services that we provide. We really try to go with crimes that have been reported And for us, that's very important because innocent victims of violent crime is a huge piece. And so the exaggerated example I always give is that if you were robbing a bank at the time you were shot, I'm sorry. That's not up our alley. But yeah.
So how do, so you were kind of talking about this resource. So what's the best way that you start to connect with folks?
In the past, I can tell you our closest relationship has been with legal. Prosecution has been really good about reaching out to us, particularly on the municipal and federal level. We have received a lot of clients that way. DAs tend to be a little bit harder just because it's such a high turnover. We have been working recently closely with the police department to increase referrals on that level because, again, looking at where we were missing earlier intervention. And so we're excited to see where that goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then do you ever provide training to folks or give technical assistance? So as an attorney, I get a lot of questions or provide system education about to folks about how to everyone looks up on CourtView, or how to figure out what's happening. Maybe that's all they really need in terms of understanding what's going on. As someone who's kind of trained in that area, when we were trying to track a crime that had occurred to us, we had a really hard time tracking it and knowing exactly what was happening, and we couldn't reach anyone. And so what do you do around that?
Yeah, we try to make sure that people are signed up for VineLink if that's an issue. Explaining CourtView, a lot of the time once somebody comes to us and becomes on our caseload, we're tracking that case too, so we might be able to say, did you see that this important hearing is coming up? Are you ready for it? But we try to explain to them too, you'll see 100 hearings, most of which don't matter. It's just some sort of continuation. So explaining which ones matter, which ones don't. But yeah, making sure that they're on Vine.
Do you produce any resources that kind of explain the common terms or anything like that someone could provide to?
I'm looking at our outreach coordinator over there. I know that, because I remember doing stuff on our website, but I don't know if it's on there. But it's a good question.
Great, thanks.
All right. Thank you. Please continue with your presentation.
So yeah, I think that otherwise it's just really making sure that, and I think I just touched on that, but that interagency cooperation and making sure that we're not fragmenting our things and it works for everybody involved is really important to us because our goal is not to make it more difficult for someone else to do their job. So yeah, our current projects, what are we doing about it? The pieces that we have in the works is we've been working for a while now with the police to try to increase those referrals. We did create these handy dandy, what we like to call cop cards, so that it's an easy piece of information to hand out to a victim. And we're about to hopefully start a pilot program in which we can receive referrals early on, so that we can reach out 24 to 48 hours following an event to see if a victim needs services. These are programs that are already operating in the lower 48 with a huge level of success, and so it'll be really exciting to see how it works here and what we can do. We're also very closely working with Violent Crime Compensation Board because that's another system that, for instance, overwhelming tons of paperwork actually operates through snail mail. So victims are sending in applications to get funding, and it's an overwhelming process. So we're working with them to train advocates throughout communities statewide, so that we can assist victims in better accessing that resource. And hopefully we're in the beginning stages of talking with the troopers to see if we can do, again, some more early intervention with law enforcement. So really everything that we're working towards is just a more cohesive, multidisciplinary approach for all victims of violent crime, which is, again, I think something that has been left out because I think we can, we're Alaska, we can do that. We're a small community. And I think we've already started to ask some questions, but anybody has any others?
Yeah, I have to actually just answer the first one. So where are you? Where is 1057 West Firelight?
We're in the United Nonprofits building, so
Oh.
the same building as Star.
Great. And if we know someone that has been a victim, they can physically drop in as well?
Mhm.
Okay. And my question is, what is your relationship with the Office of Victims' Rights of the state? I didn't hear you mention them, or if you did, I didn't hear it. So what's your connection there, and do you receive any funding for them, or how do you stay in business?
We refer to the Office of Victims' Rights when appropriate. So a lot of the time, people get us confused with Violent Crime Compensation Board and OVR. We are not lawyers. What we do is we say, this is a case where you do need legal representation. For instance, like, yes, there's continuances forever, and you also have the right to a speedy trial, not just the defendant. So this is a moment when you might want to talk to OVR. So we work closely with them in referring when it's appropriate. And I think it's really important to note that we are the only state with an actual operating Office of Victims' Rights, which is really cool. Whenever you talk to people in Local 48 that don't have them, it's kind of an interesting thing for us. But what was your other question? So yeah, we work closely with referring to them, but we are not lawyers. So.
Do you receive any state or muni funding?
We are state, muni, so the state that flows federal funds to us, as well as some general funds. And then we have a small municipal grant that assists us with providing emergency support funds. And then 25% of our funding is through unrestricted giving. So we are, like Office of Victims' Rights is like a government, we're a nonprofit.
Sure. But majority of your funding comes through this federal grant process.
Yeah, we receive VOCA funds, and then there's matching general funds through the state.
What's VOCA?
Sorry, I should know this off the top of my head. For some reason, VAWA is coming to mind, which is the Violence Against Women's Act, but I can't remember right now.
Okay, but it's a federal statute.
Yeah.
Do you know where, you said there's a muni grant that you get? Do you know, Chief, is that part of your budget? Do you know where that lives?
So,
I suspect that probably Health Department, but I don't know it's not in mind.
So it's a good guess.
And
Yeah.
there's partners from law enforcement that attend. So STAR, Awake, Victims for Justice, and then DV unit from law enforcement attends.
Okay.
Victims of Crimes Act.
Thank you.
Victims of Crimes Act. Okay. Wonderful. Well, are there any other questions? Mr. Weld?
Not a question so much, but there's something you didn't really touch on. I've been very, very minor supporter of Victims for Justice for a number of years, but they have a memorial right down the street here. And I guess it's an annual thing, but I went once and was invited to read a list of victims' names, and was surprised at how profound that was. And there was a woman in the crowd whose friend had been killed but wasn't on that list. And she said, "Can you read his name?" And it went through there. It had so much meaning for her. She broke down crying, just that he was acknowledged. And the other people, there were probably 40 or 50 people, victims, families, and so on. And it means so much to have those names read. I was just shocked at. So if you have an opportunity to do it, it was profound for me to see, and then to walk and talk to the families there and to see what their stories are. Some of them was decades ago. I mean, they won't lose it. They carry that with them for a long time. So it was really amazing.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Any other questions or comments? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. And actually, that presentation, can we get that in electronic form? Send it to Ms. Van Classen, and we can hopefully distribute it further. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Now, Chief, do you have a presentation? You have some data?
No, I have information, but I don't have a fancy PowerPoint, unfortunately.
Okay, I thought you had some, you showed me some graphs. Did we not figure out how
I
to do
do,
this?
yeah, no, this was basically notes that I made for myself, and I don't really have a way to send them, or, well, to put them up on the screen. It's information I could forward to assembly members if they're interested, but I saw on the agenda there's item C under new businesses, increase in sexual assault rates in Alaska. Since I didn't have anything else to go on, I just pulled some numbers out of our system real quick to look at, because I suspected there might be questions about that.
Right, so this is precipitated by the report that came out about overall sexual assault rates in Alaska and other kinds of crimes. And I was myself a little confused about what Anchorage's rates were in respect to that report, but I was hoping that perhaps you could give us some more information on both.
I think maybe provide a little context. So if you look at the sex assault reports that APD has taken for Anchorage over the last few years, I just looked back to 2014. So we took a total of 392 in 2014, 517 in 2015. It increased slightly in 2016 to 542, and then it dropped down to 391 in 2017, and then last year we were at 581. So I think that you can see there's sort of some natural variability there on kind of a 5-year basis anyway. And so when that report came out, of course, I'm always interested in like, well, where are we this year so far? Because the report, I think it came out early October, if I remember right, and of course it was UCR for 2018. So even though it was October 2019, the newest data in that report was almost a year old.
And UCR is Uniform Crime Reporting.
Correct, and that is information that the federal government collects from all police departments across the country and then collates. They're moving to something called NIBRS instead of UCR. So UCR was developed in, I think, the 50s or 60s, so it's fairly old. The categories are fairly broad. For example, sex assault is called forcible rape in the UCR categories, which, of course, then that doesn't even really match up with our state statutes and the way that we look at sex assault. So some of those things are being modernized in the National Incident-Based Reporting System, which is NIBRS. It's a far more detailed look at crime stats. That's something APD is working on implementing. So that's a really long-winded way of saying. So I looked at this year so far, and if you look at 2017 through the end of October, there were about 337 reports of sex assault that APD took. The same time period in 2018 through the end of October, there were 510. And then so far this year, we've had 450 approximately. So that number will change a little bit as we go through and sort of scrub those reports. Because sometimes things that initially are reports of sex assault, once we look at them and we're like, okay, this doesn't really fit the definition of sex assault as far as the Uniform Crime Reporting guidelines go, or sometimes we look at things later and we're like, oh wow, this got reported somehow differently, but this really is a sex assault and needs to be categorized that way. So those numbers can change as we sort of clean that up. So far this year compared to last year, we're down slightly year to date, and so I'll be curious to see how the year finishes up and compares.
Okay. So you said you're down slightly year to date, but it doesn't seem like slightly. Doesn't seem like a large enough change to make sort of policy determinations. You think that's correct?
No, and so again, I kind of go back to the original numbers I talked about, where it's like 14, 392, 15, 517. So there's kind of this natural variation that occurs anyway. And if I saw us go from 400 or 500 in a year to like 700, I'd be concerned about like what is happening that is driving that. The little bit of variation that we're seeing year to year, I don't think I would make sweeping policy changes. What I will tell you is we've added an additional detective to the Special Victims Unit just to make sure that we have enough capacity there to handle the cases that we're taking in. APD's approach to investigating sex assaults is very victim-oriented. So all of our detectives live in the multidisciplinary center with the advocates and with the forensic nurses, and everybody works together around the victim to investigate those cases. And I think we are honestly we sort of set the bar for national best practice when it comes to how we do that. And so we just wanted to make sure that we have adequate staff there in the detective unit to handle the cases that are coming through the door. I think, when you look at these numbers and you talk about policy changes and whatnot, from our perspective, they're somewhat steady. And then, when you talk about sex assault prevention and other things, I think then we start circling back to the same discussion we have on a lot of other issues, which is we tend to be very responsive in that particular category of crime. When it comes to prevention, you have to look at it from sort of a more holistic point of view that involves advocacy groups and the community itself and the way that we view this type of behavior amongst community members. And it's not something that just the police department can sort of do prevention work on our own.
So I'm going to put myself in the queue, and then we've got Pete and Chris. So two things. It looks like, so you said 581 in 2018, and that was the highest number going back to 2014, and significantly higher, than 392. I know some of that is based on reporting, but I guess, did that significantly higher number contribute to the reports that the number in Alaska as a whole had gone up? And then what are your thoughts about those reports about the fact that sex assault rates and related crimes had increased in Alaska as a whole? And do you have any thoughts on what might be driving that?
Well, I think that when you look at some of this variability, it is interesting. It's not a massive amount, but it's not completely insignificant either. These numbers are included in the statewide numbers, so when you see the statewide UCR numbers come out and with an increase overall, that includes Anchorage's numbers. So I guess that's answered your first question. The second one, I'm always reluctant to speculate on what drives something like this. We see substance abuse tends to be involved in a significant number of our cases, whether it's somehow either with the victim or with the suspect or with both. I think that can be a challenge sometimes. I think that the deputy chief, D.C. McCoy, spent a good chunk of his career both investigating and supervising sex assault cases, and so we talk about this a fair amount. And I think that the one thing that we circle back to for Anchorage, at least, quite a bit is that, again, because our approach to investigating these is so victim-oriented, I think people feel very comfortable reporting these things to us. And in some jurisdictions, I don't think that's necessarily the case. And occasionally I will look at other jurisdictions, look at their population, look at the number of reports that they are reporting to UCR and whatever, and I wonder if those are accurate numbers. And so there's always a chance sometimes that when you're very successful at some of these things that you can have an impact in that way on the numbers, and it makes it look like you're making the problem worse, but really what you're doing is just uncovering it. It was always there, you're just doing a better job of uncovering it. So I think that there could be an element of that built in, but again, this is just some thoughts sort of based on my experience and my discussion with our command staff on these issues. Again, just one last thing, from law enforcement's perspective, the most important thing for any report of sex assault is that from the very inception of the report with a patrol officer, whether it's a brand new patrol officer or somebody that's been around a very long time, all the way through the conclusion and hopefully successful prosecution of the case, that everything we do revolves around taking care of the victims in those cases. And I think that we're pretty good at that.
Thank you, Chief. My co-chair, Mr. Peterson, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to ask about whether there was alcohol or substance abuse related, and if you had a percentage of the cases that were involved like that. And do you think possibly part of the increase could be the fact that we have additional police officers to handle some of these cases? Because we did increase the number of officers significantly between 17 and 18, I think.
So for your first question, I don't have with me anything that indicates the percentage of cases that involve some kind of substance abuse in one form or another. I just anecdotally, my experience in law enforcement has been that is a factor sometimes, but I don't have actual numbers on that. Your second question, I don't know that adding more officers would necessarily would tend to make this particular crime category show an increase. I think these things get reported, and because it's a high priority response for us, I think even in times when we've had sort of staffing shortages, I think that we have been consistently responding to and addressing these cases. So I don't know that there maybe was underreporting because of that. I think it's probably fairly consistent. I think just generally as a whole, we probably see we probably tend to see more reports here because I think it's pretty well known in the community that if you make a report like this, it's taken seriously by APD. We, I think, do a good job of connecting with the victims, and that the process that we have set up sort of works with the victims to get through it, where maybe that's not the case everywhere outside of Alaska. So I think that people feel more comfortable reporting here than other places. That's just my perception.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, just as a sort of a different question, many times you hear the phrase domestic violence and sexual assault used in the same sentence. And so do you keep track of those crimes separately? Do you have statistics about those separately in different categories? Or do they?
I think so. Well, we definitely keep track of domestic violence related crimes. I think that there could be some that are categorized in both. They're sexual assault and have some component of domestic violence. But we do keep track of domestic violence related crimes also.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Constantine.
Thanks. So it's been a couple of years now, but I have some reports from people that have a different perspective on the process for making a report and the kind of crosswalk that they have to negotiate or navigate as a victim. And in one case in particular, and I know one case doesn't make a pattern, it relates to an individual who had been suspected of all manner of trouble, bus driver of some kind. And they went and tried to make a report, ended up having to go to some really dark and scary place, they said, to get involved in that system you're talking about, where the nurses and all of the kind of processes managed, that it was cold and unfriendly for them and pretty hard, which I imagine would be the case for anyone feeling victimized, even if it was a well-developed system. And I know we made some changes like with the location recently, and so maybe talk about how that change has been implemented, because the change came after I heard those kind of terrible stories. Or no, yeah, the change came after. The stories were before the change.
Well, the change was very recent. It was like April of this year, April or May, and we moved into a new facility. So, I mean, the facility has always been, co-located with other services. It's not something you can walk into. You have to be there with the police department as reporting yourself or having been reported as a victim of a crime. So I'm not sure about dark and scary, but so I guess I'll pivot to the new facility. It was purpose-built by Providence Health Systems. Is that right? Okay. To specifically, it's a brand new building. It was purpose designed for this to serve in this capacity. It also houses the Crimes Against Children unit. So, and it's divided. The spaces are separate, very physically separate, but very purpose built to be as accommodating to victims as it can possibly be. I think you're right. I think if you're a victim of that type of crime, probably At the point that you're having contact with detectives and forensic nurses, there's very little that's going to make you feel better about that. But this facility was designed specifically for that. So we moved those detective units in late spring or early summer of this year, and they had some of you may have been there. They had a sort of an open house, and it's a very well built place. So
Yeah, I don't know if anyone. I know I didn't go to the open house. I think it might have conflicted with something on our calendar because I don't think a lot of us went. And I had, like Mr. Constant, I had a constituent who shared a very bad experience with me about the prior facility, and I actually did go my first year on the assembly. Your officers allowed me to go and see the facility and see where it was, and there were some serious problems. And I appreciate the effort that was made to move it to the new location. And we've talked about trying to do, like we do with some other, have an assembly visit. But because of the nature of the facility, I don't think we can really have a group of us go. But perhaps individual assembly members could reach out to you and talk about if they're really curious about the new facility.
Yep, that's not a problem at all. You're right, a group would be a little bit of a challenge because now, of course, it's in normal operation. And so we can even probably accommodate a couple at a time, but we would obviously not want to disrupt the ongoing investigations that are there. But yeah, I don't see that as a problem at all. It should be no problem to get anybody in that's interested in seeing it.
Yeah, I would ask my colleagues to, I don't really want to do that through the Public Safety Committee. If you're interested in that facility, which is obviously sensitive, please reach out directly to the chief.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. And just back around a little bit to the general topic. Last couple of weeks, or last even 8 days, have been a string of high-profile potential homicides. And it seems to me, and I don't understand yet if there is or not, there's a pattern in time when these things happen. Kind of in the fall, it seems like as things start to get cold, these things spike. Are there patterns to, not necessarily the homicide crime, but these sex crimes that can be seen in a broader sense that we could look to policies that might help us to intervene, or would you suggest it really is simply random?
I don't know that I'd say they're random. I mean, there's typically, the patterns typically revolve more around behavior than they do time of year. And so that's something, I mean, anytime we have that we're looking internally at APD at crime categories, I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? Is there a pattern? Because if there's a pattern, then you can anticipate the activity and then maybe do some prevention work. So that's something we're always looking at. I don't know that we have a specific pattern as far as like, physical locations or anything like that with sex assaults, but, like I said, it's something that we're always looking at.
It's just like, it seems like every November, freeze up happens, stray murders happens. Like the numbers just start to pile up towards the end of the year. It just seems like they're
Okay. So next week, I've asked the chief, next meeting, the chief to come back and present to us the sort of statistical breakdown that we had once in the summer. We used to get with more regularity. We've just had such a busy, the last few months we've had a very full agenda, and so it's slipped my mind to ask you, but if in December we could get that statistical report, and that will have a variety of different things, not just sex assaults on there. I think that is always an illuminating discussion. Are there any final questions for the chief before we let him go? Mr. Peterson.
Thank you. And this is a different subject other than the first three that we were talking about. And we've seen presentations that we've got a pretty decent increase in the number of pedestrians that have been hit and some killed. And we've got a president of the community councils that Mr. Dunbar and I represent over at Russia, Jack, that has been saying for years that the problem with pedestrians being hit here is that jaywalking isn't enforced. And then he talks about Carson City, Nevada, I believe it is, as an example, where they basically have zero jaywalking. And the reason that's the case is because they have undercover officers 1 or 2 days a month that go out and write tickets to people for jaywalking. And so I'm just wondering, does anybody ever get a ticket for jaywalking in Anchorage?
I don't know how many jaywalking tickets we've issued recently. I'm sure I can find out. It's not something that we typically have special enforcement on. I'm trying to imagine how many undercover police officers we need to cover the entire 220 square miles of the police service area. I feel like it'd be a lot. So, I don't know that that's, I don't know. I guess it would be interesting to see how much effort it would take to change that particular behavior through enforcement. But I'm not sure that's something that we want to invest in.
Well, and I'm not suggesting you do that. I was just bringing the subject up because he has brought it up on more than one occasion. And he actually, part of the reason for that was because he hit a pedestrian that was jaywalking one time. And I suppose it had made an impression on him. I would imagine if you hit a pedestrian, that's going to affect you as a driver. I mean, that's probably with me. And so I just thought that was something that I'd at least throw out there since we have a little time left.
I will say, I know the number of jaywalking tickets is more than 0 because a friend of mine did get one.
Oh, there you go.
But she was at the Pioneer Bar since you guys moved in. I was like, well, we just put she walked right in front of the new headquarters, so it was sort of brought upon herself. Mr. Constant.
I certainly hope it's not a high priority for our police force. So I heard recently.
Sorry, I just wanted to acknowledge I have jaywalking tickets. So I think in maybe the year 2009, 2010, we had a sting operation for jaywalking for about a week or something by APD. So 2 of my co-workers here at City Hall got jaywalking tickets crossing the street to Kalani Brothers because they were using the crosswalk. So there are tickets at some point.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. I'm sorry, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I heard a report recently of Fairbanks implementing some kind of a new element to their 911 system that allows citizens to, through a website, not just update that their address is accurate to their phone number or whatever, but actually allowing them to put in demographic information on themselves so that when a response is made at that site, APD has a kind of more broad set of data. Have you heard of this system?
Yeah, I think, I can't remember what it's called. It's the same one that we're looking at. It's something 911. Yeah. So, yes, APD is looking at sort of so we just recently went through a round of 911 system upgrade in Anchorage. We went from E911, which was enhanced 911, to NG911, which is next generation 911. And it includes some of that. We're also have sort of an add-on that we're in the process of bringing on board that will include some additional location functionality for mobile devices and stuff like that. And I believe some of what you're talking about. And we're in the process of looking to upgrade the computer-aided dispatching system, which is sort of the other half of what happens in the dispatch center that would potentially have some of that capability as well. So,
Report back.
Yep. Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This reminded me of the question I've been meaning to ask, because I got a call from someone who was really upset at the wait times, for APD. I explained about priority calls. Is there any way that dispatch can inform an individual if there is an option for online reporting for the thing they are reporting? Because it sounds like this was one of those things that they waited an hour and then they called back and they called back and they were very frustrated. And so I was going to check into that and now into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. We definitely do refer people if we think that they can avoid wait times by doing online reporting, or sometimes even over the phone reporting. We have call takers and records that can take take reports over the phone sometimes. There's a little bit of a balance there. We had one point where dispatch was forwarding almost everybody to online reporting, and that wasn't always great. So we sort of dialed them back a little bit, but we'll definitely, I can talk to the dispatch center manager about it. But we do that, and it's just a constant balance to make sure that the people that actually need face-to-face contact with us get it, and that we're not diverting. I had a report one time of like an armed robbery or something that somebody tried to get the roof, and it was like, no, that's not online reporting.
As I say, is there a resource for us so that we can educate the public of kind of what generally could be online or police? I mean, I understand they should be screened by dispatch,
Mhm.
but then someone could possibly ask, or just know more about it so we can help educate the public
I
about
think
that.
if you go to our online reporting portal, it has some like, hey, if you're here, this is good for online reporting. If you have these things going on, maybe you need to talk to us.
Okay.
And so
check it out.
we'll make a note to email you the link to where the online reporting portal is. We're also going through the process of updating the department's website. We're part of the Greater Municipal website, which
Greater.
yeah, so we're working on that. I'm maybe trying to split us off into our own area so it's a little bit more user-friendly, because we do have a lot of things that you can't interact with us. And as we've talked sort of on a related topic, we've talked a lot lately about the backlog to accessing information from the police department, and I know that the Assembly is looking at ways to help us with that. We're looking at technology to make that better, and as we work
How you
towards...
doing?
Great.
Oh, was that?
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Ms. LaFrance, I think you're off of mute.
All right, well, we'll pretend like we don't hear that. So one of the things I would like to get to is that part of that online interaction with the police department is also the ability to maybe obtain police reports that way and other things. So we're driving in that direction. We're looking to implement a new records management system. We hope very much that will include that as well. So.
Thank you. All right, so we've got Mr. Gates, Mr. Peterson, and then I'd like to close this hearing since we've completed the agenda.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Since you mentioned the 911, NG911 system, I recall seeing the contract a year ago come by for some approval. One of the elements mentioned was the system's ability, if they turned on the feature, to take emergency calls by SMS or text messaging. Is that incorporated now? Is that?
It's not something that we're currently doing. And I'm always very reluctant to even talk about it until we are doing it, because as soon as somebody says it out loud, the public will attempt to make it happen. And if we're not ready to do that, I want to make sure that nobody is missing out communicating with 911 because they're attempting to access a channel that we're not receiving on. So that is typically a component of NG911 systems, and at some point we will look to implement that here, but we're not there yet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And at our meeting last night, we heard anecdotal evidence from testifiers about a backlog and getting police reports. And I was talking to my co-chair about this before the meeting started for a minute. But we're wondering if in next year's budget, we thought we remembered you're just adding a couple positions in the non-sworn area. Is that really enough to handle the problem and to get caught up? Do we need to get more additional officers in that area?
So the backlog is frankly epic at this point. And we do need more. We need two things there. We need more staff and we need better technology. And we're working on both of those things. And there is a proposal in the 2020 budget to add more staff there. I think that will help. I don't know if that will fully solve the problem. We're also going to be adding some positions to the 911 center because we're concerned about increased wait times there as well. So we'll be balancing that out. And then I hope that as we work our way through some of these technology projects, that will also make that more efficient and then help us work through the backlog. So we're kind of going at it in two different directions.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Thank you, Chief. We have time now for audience participation. Would anyone like to participate? All right, seeing no one, this meeting is adjourned.